So today I'm going to be talking about the Russo-Ukrainian War. What were you doing on February 22nd, 2024? You probably went to class, had some sort of activities after school, maybe you went to work. You probably can't even recall what you did that day because it was pretty normal. However, for people in Ukraine, this was one of the scariest days of their lives. This was the day that the Russian invasion began in eastern Ukraine. In this speech, I will demonstrate how staying up to date on geopolitical issues can help you understand the world around you even better, because geopolitics shapes how the world operates. Even if a conflict is far away, it can still have impacts at home. Geopolitical conflicts impact trade, availability of resources, immigration and refugee policies, education, and freedom of travel, just to name a few. The media has largely stopped covering the war, and many people think that the war is over, but there are still millions of people suffering as a result of this conflict. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has led to high losses for both civilians and combatants. First, I will describe how the invasion is significant and the history of the tensions, then how high losses are a major catastrophe that this conflict has created. Let's examine the beginning of the invasion. The invasion began on February 24th, 2022 in eastern Ukraine. Let's explain some key details about the invasion. According to the Kiev Independent in 2022, President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia will conduct a special military operation to demilitarize Ukraine, effectively declaring a war on the country. The humanitarian impact of the invasion is very large. It has displaced millions of Ukrainians. The United Nations reports in a 2026 article that over 3.7 million Ukrainians have been displaced since the beginning of the invasion. This is due to people fleeing the invasion. Putin made clear the motives for the invasion in his declaration of war. BBC stated in 2022 that Putin's goals were demilitarization of Ukraine. However, the motives go deeper than just demilitarization. Prior to the invasion, on December 17, 2021, Russia brought forth a large proposal to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, that requested a promise from NATO that Ukraine and other Eastern European countries would not join the organization in return for being more open to cooperating with NATO in the future, according to an AP article. Russia stands in opposition to NATO expansion eastwards, and only a few months after this proposal, which the West rejected, the invasion began. We can look back even further in history to see that this conflict did not begin in 2022. In 2014, following an uprising that removed Ukraine's pro-Russian president from office, Putin sent in troops and took Crimea, which is a peninsula in southern Ukraine that has long been a strategic asset due to its ports and military bases. Putin then held a referendum in Crimea and stated that the majority of Crimeans wanted to be a part of Russia. The West largely dismissed this referendum and stated that it was illegal, according to a PBS article published in 2025. It has been over 4 years since the war has started, and thousands of people have died as a result of the conflict. Let's take a closer look at some of the losses sustained throughout the conflict. It has led to high losses for both civilians and combatants. This conflict has had the highest losses in any war since World War II. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, estimated in 2026 that Russia sustained 275 to 325,000 fatalities from February 2022 to December of 2025. To help quantify the number of casualties, we can visualize Geese Memorial Stadium, which seats about 60,000 people. Now imagine 5 completely sold-out stadiums, and that would be equivalent to the amount of fatalities sustained by the Russian forces. Approximately 1.2 million soldiers have been killed, wounded, or gone missing since the beginning of the invasion. CSIS states that no major power has suffered anywhere near these numbers of fatalities or casualties in any war since World War II. A casualty is defined as a military person lost through death, wounds, injury, sickness, internment, capture, or being missing in action. We can take a look at this figure to help further quantify the data that I've presented. This chart aggregates data from CSIS, The Economist, Kiev Independent, and Statista, and compares the losses of the Ukraine invasion to other conflicts throughout history. The invasion of Ukraine has sustained 17 times more losses than during the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s. You may notice that there is a discrepancy in the data. This chart says 1.6 million, but I have reported 1.2 million losses. This is due to neither side being transparent about the losses sustained, so graphs like this rely on many sources to compile estimates from Russia, from Ukraine, and also independent estimates, all reporting slightly different values. And it is suggested to take these estimated values at as a minimum estimate of losses. So we can take a look at this. You can see in the blue, each person represents 1,000 individuals, and you can see the Russian wounded versus killed compared to the Ukraine wounded versus killed, and then some conflicts from throughout history. Russia's high losses can be attributed to a lack of training, attacking Ukrainian positions without support fire, says CSIS. These are not effective strategies and have been proven to not push forward the front lines into Ukraine. These losses contribute to a feedback loop of continuing to need soldiers on the front lines. They are deployed hastily without proper training and are not prepared to face Ukrainian forces. In contrast, CSI has stated in a 2025 article that Ukraine does not feel these consequences due to the knowledge of the terrain in their country, more advanced battle strategies, and a more prepared military. The comparison of Russian and Ukrainian preparedness could be compared to studying very well for an exam versus just showing up and winging it. Now, soldiers and military personnel are not the only people that are impacted by war. Let's take a look at how it has impacted civilian life. Attacks on civilian infrastructure have led to high casualties. The UN remarks in a 2026 report that 2025 was the deadliest year for civilians since the invasion began, and that 97% of casualties verified by the UN Human Rights Office in 2025 occurred in government-controlled territory, attacks launched from Russian armed forces. This is due to Russia's use of suicide drone attacks and long-range missile launches. There have been over 15,000 Ukrainian civilians killed since the start of the invasion, according to the UN Civilian Update Report in 2026. State Farm Center can seat about 16,000 people during basketball games, so you can imagine attending a nearly sold-out basketball game, and that would be equivalent to how many civilians have been killed. We can also take a look at this chart, which is from Statista, and it uses data from that UN's report to show the amount of civilians killed versus wounded, and then of those attacks, how many of them were children that were victims of the attacks. According to a 2024 UN article, there were over 400 missiles launched at Kiev in a 2-month period. Missiles interrupt the daily lives of hundreds of thousands of people living in Kiev. Imagine having to stop what you're doing almost 6 times a day to go to a bomb shelter or safe area. Most students don't have 6 classes in a day, or even have that many reasons to leave your house. People living in Kiev are living in this situation where inconveniences are life-threatening. In conclusion, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has led to high losses for both civilians and combatants. I described how the invasion is significant and the history of the tensions, and then how the high losses are a major catastrophe that this war has created. This conflict has highlighted the importance of awareness in terms of geopolitical issues. It's necessary to stay informed about these topics as they affect people who may think they're disconnected from the conflict. I hope that this speech helps you quantify some of the more recent updates of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. My works cited is in the description. Thanks for watching.